everyone. Welcome to our webinar, leveraging integrations to enhance the value of your website. So I think we'll go ahead and get underway. First, some introductions. Let me get here. All right, my name is Scott Shepard. I'm Director of Marketing at Unleashed Technologies, and our presenter today is Mike Spinosa, President and co-founder of Unleashed Technologies. We'll get to know him a little bit later, a little bit more. So, all right, first some ground rules, especially if you have questions, go ahead and enter them in the chat. We will have time to answer some questions at the end. If there's something you don't want to talk about in the chat, if you just want to email us, our information is all over this slide. So please reach out to Mike or I directly and let us know what your questions are. Once we're done with this, we will be sharing a recording of the webinar to all attendees and registrants. However, if you are here for the CAE credit, just so you know, it only counts if you attended live. So if you're watching the recording, it doesn't really count. So we will provide the list as required by ASAE and share them upon request. Share that list upon request. And lastly, if there are topics we would do these kind of regularly. So if there's a topic you would like us to cover, please let me know. We're always interested in new topics and hearing back from our clients and our friends and our partners about what's kind of the topics that are top of mind. So, and with that, let's go ahead and meet our presenter today. Many of you may already know him. Mike Spinosa is the president and co-founder of Unleashed Technologies. I think it's safe to say you've been in associations for at least a decade, maybe a little bit longer than that now. And he frequently presents to association groups, including at their most recent ASAE Tech. And actually, we're going out to Georgia soon to meet with the Georgia State ASAE and present to them as well. And then, of course, he's just a man about town. So he's frequently at the many events that hopefully we'll all be getting back to in person soon. So, and with that, let me pass the baton, if you will, to Mike. Mike, I am actually going to try to make you presenter, so that should make it a little bit easier on us.
Yeah. Can that allow me to advance the slides as well, Scott, while I'm presenter?
Yes, it will.
Okay, great. I am a man about town because otherwise no one would talk to me. I need to be active within the town. I can't just be waiting for the world to come to me. Thank you so much for introducing me, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I'm going to talk a little bit about leveraging integrations for your association, and I'm going to kind of take you through, a stepped process here. One of the things that I want to start with, that I'm going to jump into, if I can advance it. Next slide.
All right. Okay. Yeah, it doesn't seem to be letting you advance, so just let me advance it. So.
No problem. So one of the first things I want to talk about is the expectations of associations. And I'm under the assumption that everybody attending here today is in a position in an association that understands these challenges. But what's really interesting about them is that you have a lot more on you than just even standard commercial practices would businesses. You've got to focus on membership, CPE, community, magazines, journals, advocacy, publications. Most associations, particularly the membership-driven ones, they have some combination of what we see here. And if you start taking the challenges of those expectations, so if we have membership, we expect a seamless sign up experience. If we have CPE, a lot of people want to carry those CPE and those accreditations through the website. If we're talking about community, we want it to be alive and managed, right? And these are things that are hard enough to just manage from the business perspective of keeping people engaged, let alone the technology perspective. So right here alone, it looks like about 10 items right here that just come off the cuff of things that associations have to manage. But what does that mean when we start breaking it down to systems? Because when most associations think of integrations, they think of their AMS, but it's so much more than that. So let's go next slide. So on the next slide here, we see a systems view. So let's take a different angle to this. I think that it's safe to say, for the most part, while you're forwarding people around, you do see your primary digital presence as the first stopping point for people. One of the common misconceptions is they land on your homepage, but outside of that, we have all of these systems that relate to the 10 topics that I listed in the slide previous. So, you know, if we think about a publishing platform, that can take care of true publications, that can take care of journals, that can take care of magazines. You have a marketing platform. A lot of times we see the association management system, the AMS, and the marketing platform combined into one, depending on what kind of AMS is had here. We've purposely driven more of an agnostic kind of discussion here for you today. I'm sure I'll end up mentioning a couple people that are in the space, but we want to focus on everybody, and we want to make sure everybody can take something away from this. Your learning management system for your CPE, your general education, and community platforms that would include things like message boards or communicating with other members. Sometimes the community platform can also take care of what we call member profiles. A lot of times that's in the AMS and pulled from the AMS, but we see these different things for different groups can be attached to different areas. So when we kind of look at how all these things come together, a lot of times they don't come together because there's too much happening and we're trying to serve too many different needs. So why don't we go next slide and talk about what should drive integrations. Now, one of the really cool things about Unleashed Technologies, and I think is very valuable for the association market, is the association market represents the largest single vertical for associations, but we also do commercial work. So 65–70% of our business is focused towards membership-driven associations, while the rest of the business is focused on commercial. And one of the things that we're going to talk about on this upfront integration discussions is what we see from both of those sides in the different focuses. So what should drive integration? I'm going to say, I'm sure, a series of things that you might find pretty obvious, but then I think I might surprise you on what I say on the back end. So from an integrations perspective, we want to really focus on what I call the pay no mind experience. And what the pay no mind experience is that when you think about the last 10 websites you went to, if they were really well done, you didn't think about them at all. You just thought that they were easy to use, they fit the need that you needed to get done. The majority of websites, with the exception of news, entertainment, other things that you're interested in, are not really destination websites. People come with a very particular purpose. We want to create a pay no mind experience. So if someone signs up for a new membership, it's active right away, they're in the database, the right structures are correct, and they can just start operating. People remember when they signed up for a membership and then they had to wait 24 hours to get access to the resources, or somebody had to reach out to them. You want that visitor first experience. We want access to member resources. We need seamless member acquisition. We also want resources on demand. And while these things are very broad and sweeping, we can put them to specific things that every association can attach to. During this presentation, we're actually going to talk about an actual metric for grading if an integration is valuable to the association. Community engagement, we talked about that before. That's handled on both technology and in the community itself. So what actually drives integrations, which I think is what we need to talk about. So 90%, maybe that's high, 80% of the associations that we see in the work that we do, if you could go next slide, Scott, this is what we see when we talk about driving integrations. We see a dog very busy on the web. But besides that, what we see is that they're focused internally on lightening their administrative burden. This is usually spawned by a myriad of factors, but they're same across all of the different associations. Typically, the first thing we hear is our staff is small and we need greater automation so that we can do more. We can't afford to bring more people on. They have system management fatigue. So remember, we went back to that systems view after we looked at all the things that people have to do, and it wears them out. We're looking at a consolidation of 6 systems for an average association that's trying to maintain affordable products or best of breed in each of those different areas. It gets complicated. And then what happens in all of this, while the association professionals trying to do the best to manage all of this, we receive smaller one-off complaints. And what happens is people are so member centric in this industry, so focused that becomes the newest priority in that process. So we put whatever that small or that small bucket of complaints is to the top of the list. What may or may not be popular here is we've always got to start with the visitor, member, partner, external experience before we start with what's happening internally. I'm not saying I'm saying that should be more important than what's internal, but they both have value. And we're going to talk about how to grade that value today. Like, how do we actually have something tangible other than, me just telling you this? So let's go to the next slide. We're going to talk about assessing value. Assessing the value of an integration doesn't have to be complicated, but it does need to be formulaic. So if we go right into it, Scott, that would be wonderful. There's a couple things I wanted to talk about. So how do we address the value of an integration? Well, we've got three major areas: external, internal, and impact. So when we have these three things, we can talk about what's in each one of them. So visitors, members, and partners are our external base, and we want to focus on conversion, engagement, personalization, and general web visibility. If I get a little deeper into what that means, conversion is membership conversion, event conversion, people going through the articles, people browsing through comments and deciding to become a member. Engagement, or rather I should go to personalization next. Personalization is the art of making each of these experiences custom for at least different segments, if not individuals within visiting your website or that are members of your website. Now, that's a little bit farther down the road in terms of technology. Then it can have a little bit of a heavier lift to it, but there's great progress being made in these areas. Engagement is getting people to engage with. If you looked at this, you may be interested in that. Maybe it's somebody completely managing their membership from within the website. One of the things that we see as challenges is that we have this beautiful association website that forwards to 15 different systems. And then we do our best to skin it so it looks the same. And we say, hey, we've met the goal. This is good. We don't want the complexities of the integration. That's going to add an additional layer, but that's not what's best for the users. That's not what's best for the visitors and members all the time. And there's diminishing returns. So when we talk about visibility, we're losing big chunks of that SEO that should be related back to the primary domain. It's no longer associated with that. Google and other search engines are treating it as something different. So it's hurting what we call your domain authority. It's become very popular, especially in the AMS world, for AMSs to try to do everything. But when you look at the map that I just showed you, how could they possibly be good at everything? That's why you have other systems that augment this, and your website should be no different. So we talk about the internal group. That's your staff, your contributors, external contributors. You might have people that bring in articles and put them directly in your web presence. You might have a workflow process, executives, that people on the board, people at the senior level that are engaging with the web presence from an internal perspective. This is where we want to see our automation and effort reduction. But what we want out of that automation and what we want out of that effort reduction is a better net experience for the external user. Ultimately, it can benefit both, and that's what we really need to focus on. Having a certain type of workflow trigger and happen in the back end that only alleviates small burdens off of an internal staff may not present the most value that you need to have. So I like things that automate efforts that reduce error for your constituents. And then finally, the impact. Every association is going to have different focuses. I could show you associations that are huge on advocacy, but do no events. I can show you associations that do all events. So if we look, for instance, we do Special Equipment Manufacturers Association, or SEMA, and in that, it's a one giant event a year, and it's the second largest conference in the world. But then we take the flip side. We also do the Virginia Society of CPAs, and they're all membership. They're all CPE with some events sprinkled in around Virginia. So we have a completely different focus there. And the story goes on and on against all of these different types of groups. So heavily membership focused groups like AUSA or USNI. Everybody derives, I call it money for the mission. We all have to derive money for the mission in a different spot. So we need to understand what the valuable impact is. What are the desired results in the KPIs and what's the cost? Now, we're going to take these three factors and quite literally put them into an equation that you can run, and I'm going to show you examples of it. So let's go next slide. Scoring considerations. This is top secret stuff. You can't give this out anywhere. It's so valuable. I mean, it's insane. But we've got the external value, the external plus the internal plus the cost divided by the number of factors equals our impact score. This is gauged on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being the best and 1 being the worst. So when we rate like the external value, that is qualitative because it kind of has to be. It is going to align with your KPIs. So we're going to say external and internal value should be done by a committee and it's qualitative, but your cost is quantitative. And we can't just say it's quantitative, we have to put a metric to it. And then we're dividing these three things added up by the number of factors, which is here is obviously 3, which is going to give us our score. Now, when we measure qualitative, that needs to be done by a committee or a group of people. And the reason for that is that what's really important to one person will not nearly be as important to another. And you need to have all those voices mixed in so that you understand and can come out to how this affects your key performance indicators or how you want to drive forward as an organization. Now, one of the things that's highly dependent on the cost is what systems you have in place today. And this is where I might do a little bit of name dropping. Let's go next slide while I'm talking about it. So as a for instance, if you have a Salesforce derivative AMS, because most associations have some version of an AMS, that you have a very robust API to work with. That is going to reduce your total cost because it's such a mature product. Where if we take an offbeat AMS that's maybe much smaller in the market, but it doesn't have a robust API, or maybe it's just missing documentation and it can't do quite as much, or it's not configured to do as much, that's going to elevate your costs on the integration end as a perfect example. So how do we actually do quantitative scoring for cost? Well, for this, we're going to set up a metric. This is simple. So I'm pretending that my association, I'm a big paintball guy. I've gotten so old now, I've crested over into coaching. You know, all my sports and hobbies belong on what we call the Ocho for ESPN. I do the weirdest things, but I love paintball, and I have a paintball association. So in the paintball association, I'm trying to do an integration with I'm going to take as an example, my marketing system and my AMS to my front end Drupal website, or maybe my WordPress website, however we want to do it. I created this, I said, I've got a $50,000 budget. Now, keep in mind, this could be a $10,000 budget. This could be a $5,000 budget. It could be $200,000 budgets. And you see how associations span the gambit and based on what they want to do. So if I took a $50,000 budget, I'm going to take that score of 10, and the highest number, 10, is going to be associated to the lowest amount broken up evenly. The only thing that I would want to mention in this is you don't always have to grade it completely linearly. It's up to you if you want to put some kind of curve in there. I did this linearly for this just to make it simple. So under 5K is a 10, and then at our maximum budget, we have the lowest score, which is 50,000. So if one feature costs 50,000, well, that's not going to be very good for us. So let's do some scoring. Let's do some actual scoring. So I've taken things that I hear from every association every single time, and I've gone ahead and put them and scored them based on my paintball association. Why don't we go next slide, Scott? Perfect. Single sign-on. Unless you've been living under a rock, everybody wants single sign-on. This is one of the key things that we can do that benefits not only the visitors and members, but also the internal goals, because it drastically reduces complaints, it drastically reduces member frustration, and it gives us access to all these resources under a single login. So it's a great idea. So most associations, including the Paintball Association, are going to score this as a 10. Internally, well, let's say I'm a small association, Paintball Association, belongs on the Ocho. I don't have a lot of members. It's going to be a 10 internally because I don't have the bandwidth or the staff to do that. But it also has a huge benefit to my membership and my visitors. Now, from a cost perspective, now this I made it up. This is probably a little high. This would probably be a 10, 10, 10. But I wanted to, show numbers as they equaled out. So I made the cost score an 8, and you'll see that the priority is 9. Now, obviously, that 28 divided by 3 doesn't come out to an even number. I like to round up and round down. You can also round to halves, but I usually just round up or down to the whole number. And I like to do this exercise with people now, especially when I'm talking through where they're trying to go and what they're trying to do so that they can understand the value of the integration. So on this first page, I have a couple really high value examples. So members and visitors can log in even when connection to local authority is unavailable. If you're not clear what that is, that means what we're going to do is we're going to pull all the information. If your AMS is your authoritative base for who your members are, we're going to pull their access resource, their resources, their login information, everything into the website itself and have a local copy. Its first move in an integration is to go out and check against the AMS. If it doesn't come back, it will pull that data, because if you don't have that, then they just don't get access. It returns an error. This is more complicated than it looks. The value externally is a 10 because they don't feel any interruption in service. When connections, APIs go down, different things happen. From an internal perspective, it still has a very, very high value. It might create a little overhead because sometimes you'll have to make sure that the integration is working as expected, a little more than you would with other things. And the cost score, it's more expensive. It's more expensive. We got to pull all those user rights in the system. We have to map those within our WordPress or Drupal site, understand how they affect the resources that are on the website, and then we get a different priority level. That's a 7. If you're a smaller organization, you may not want to mess with that because you're adding a bigger cost for something that may not have quite of an impact. However, if you are a member with if you are an association with tens of thousands of members or even hundreds of thousands, as we see, this metric could easily go to, 10, 10, and on a cost score, maybe a 4 because there's so much in the website, but it's really, really valuable. Membership sign-up experience. Money to fuel the mission, experiences to keep them for a lifetime, right? So we're talking about a high value, and there's nothing more important than having a great membership experience. I can't tell you how often this feature, and I'm very hot on this personally, is delegated to the AMS. And what you do is you hit this slightly styled, sometimes better than others, sometimes not, but it's not impactful. An association has a mission, it has an objective, and you have to get to people not only in an intellectual way, but in an emotional way. And when we do it through the AMS, we limit our ability to do that effectively. By bringing this process into the website, the digital presence, and then using the APIs to translate the data back and forth, we can have impactful video in both spots. Sure, that's true, but one looks like a crappy YouTube frame and the other one's completely integrated within the entire page style. It is completely tailored. All the different memberships and how they're stacked out and how we make those viewable is so customizable. We see people try to do hybrids of this where they'll have all of that done inside the website and then they'll click and it'll go out to a more general process that still has them reselecting and doing these things again. It's not really very effective, to be perfectly honest. This is one that you should put your integration time into, and in your decision-making matrix, I think you say if the mission it's the most important mission isn't events, if it isn't publications, journals, or accreditations, and it's your membership, then why would this be an area where you say, well, just put that on the AMS and they can just sign up like that? No, we need to make that part of the greater experience, and we need to work with conversion. The last thing I want to say about this is you can't really tweak AMSs to have really great conversion experiences, and that also includes the form. I can't say this enough. It also includes the form and all the data that they put in. Doing minor tweaks and having different experiences is very important. We need to be able to A, B, C, D, everything test, variable testing, A/B testing. We need to be able to do that so we can see what's getting the best results. A lot of times when we go into associations, this is sort of like off to the shelf and we think it needs to become front and center, but from an integration standpoint, we have to have a strong integration for that to work. Now, I'm going to put a couple more examples out there now that I've, played this violin for way too long. And I'm going to go to harder to make decisions because I think those were all slam dunks. Let me give you an example. So someone can join through the website and you have that seamless experience. Well, one thing that gets really, from an integration perspective, that can get really hairy is members can completely control their membership through website. The website login. They can go in, they can select their preferences, they can see when their expiration is, they can click the auto renew. And I'm just giving a small list of features. Maybe you even want to build a dashboard. Well, depending where a lot of your assets come from, it may not all come from an AMS. Part of those assets could come from a number of other systems. So your cost score starts multiplying quickly based on your technology stack. There may not be enough value for you to have all of that membership management on the website. If you're going to ask me, I'm going to tell you every time we're going to want to do that. And the reason for that is because we want to make a seamless experience that all your members fall in love with. But we do have to do some risk deduction from a cost perspective and say, what is the return? This still ended up at a priority 8 because even though it's expensive, it's an incredible user experience. Now, let's take something else, for example, event control. For the Paintball Association, events are all over the country and there's already a group that does all the registration. So I'm not really a big events association. What I am is I'm an advocacy guy to shed education on paintball and what it really is versus what it is not. And that I'm trying to create resources so that people that enjoy the hobby of paintball can find where to go. But so externally, it has a much lower value. Maybe I could do some kind of listings. Internally, I'm going to rate it high because I want to give people as much information as possible about the sports and I want to be a hub for information. But integrating that with an event platform or something else that I may or may not have, that cost is going to be very prohibitive for the value. That's somewhere where, as much as I came out to a 7 there, making my decision using this system of grading, I would probably take that and forward it out to another system and say, we're not ready for that. Or we could put in what we call the iterative matrix, which is something we'll go over next. Right now, we're just assessing how we make the decision. The next steps are how we get to implementation, how we do the implementation. Cross-platform posting, this might be familiar to you. I am going to say a brand because everybody knows it. So Higher Logic, right? A lot of people know what Higher Logic is. And then you've got your website over here. And then you have your member that's logged in. A lot of people want to put the posts and the threads that they're tracking back into the website. This is really great for really huge organizations with a tremendous budget, but it actually creates a lot of complications. And there's significantly better low-hanging fruit than that you could get into. So for the Paintball Association, it has a very little value. That would not make the grade. That's below 5 out of 10 or at 5 out of 10 on the impact score, right? The priority. Same thing for CPE. I'm not teaching anybody anything. Only reason I didn't make this all ones is because I felt like it'd be less cool for the presentation. Not doing any training here. So this is how we run the decision-making matrix. And if you have questions about this, I've been informed I'm not allowed to stop webinars in the middle of webinars for questions. So please pile them up if you have anything here about this. Let's go to the next slide where we are going to talk about common traps. So like nobody can sniff out a trap like Admiral Akbar, first of all. This guy knows traps. Like it's because he falls for all of them. Every time he says it, he's in the middle of a terrible situation, right? But we want to take the avoidance tactic to that. So there's a couple things that I would say when we're specifically assessing the value of integration. Let's talk qualitative and let's talk quantitative. I'm going to move from the qualitative to the quantitative. Do not artificially inflate the value of features. What that really should say is do not artificially inflate the value of your features based on your role. Of course, you're going to be hot for what's most important to you, but you have to look at the organization overall and what's most important from a goals perspective, from a KPIs perspective. That's why it's very bad when we have one contact that's operating in a vacuum, deciding what's most important. Because what we're going to get from that is what they feel is the most important thing, as opposed to how everybody's feeling about, like, you want to get your marketing, your membership marketing involved. You want to get your publications folks involved, and you want to understand what's important to them. Excuse me. Creating a consistent structure for measuring cost. I'm going to come back to that one. Investigating systems before integrations. This is crucial. So if we don't understand what other systems have, at least at a high level, if you're running this process internally, you can't understand what the quantitative measure is at all. This is very, very important, especially if you have something that I'm going to use the words off-brand, but probably a better word is boutique. There's nothing wrong with having boutique systems. That's how boutique systems become big systems that become all kinds of things. Sometimes you find something that just meets your organization's needs perfectly, but you have to understand a couple basics there. What are the integration capabilities? Is there documentation is the most crucial thing. Everybody will tell you that they have some form of integration. If they can't send you API documentation, that is a major red flag. That red flag is about what your future costs will be to integrate with that system, because anybody can do integrations, and we'll talk about myths and truths in a second here, but it's, it becomes very difficult, and it also runs your bill up significantly if you don't have that documentation, not just from what the professional service provider is doing on the website, but the other professionals you need on the other side to assist them. Understanding the total cost makes sense, and create that consistent measure, that unit of measure for measuring a quantitative. If somebody says this feature is going to take 7,500, I would always recommend that you add 10 to 15% to that. We call it developer optimism in the real world. And people look at that and be like, that's no problem. I've done that 100 times. And they're right. They have done it 100 times. But they're always looking at the best case. As a firm, what we do is Unleashed is we do a little different. We take the worst case, we take the best case, we take the worst case. Then we have that middle score that comes together plus QA and PA, or project management, excuse me, so that we can see what that actually looks like, and we can give you a range of view of what could possibly happen there. Let's go next slide. So let's talk implementation. We're there. Let's go into the implementation. One step at a time. The first thing we want to do is we can't eat the whole cake at once, right? But that is what we see almost all associations do. Whether they're doing a rebuild, or they're deciding to work with the existing platform, whatever's happening, it's always got to be everything at launch. And that is not the strategy. Your commercial competitors that are eroding the association markets are working iteratively. They're getting things out there. They're making sure they're polished in small doses and continually iterating on top of them. We see this very large planning session for associations. We see a lot of work go into the integrations, and it's all very, very fine detail. But what we need to do is really say, what are the most important things? And let's do those so perfectly that people are blown away when the website launches, that they just have everything that they need. So let's take, for instance, integrating your membership management system, which may be just a membership management system. It might come from your CRM, or it could even come from your AMS. For the sake of standardization and what we usually see, I'm going to say AMS for the purpose of this example with the Paintball Association. But creating a membership sign up is the first step. The second step in that process, making sure that works flawlessly. And again, we can do a lot of these pieces together before we launch, but what we want to do is understand where they logically break. So getting people signed up, having a way for them to review their account. Or I would say actually the second step would be access rights and paywall-based features based on gated content, things like that. Then we start going into more like the management portal, and then maybe we can start customizing based on some of their selections within that portal that also jump out to your email marketing system, other things that they're signing up for, and making sure we're tracking and doing all that. Dependencies are very important. I'm sure if you've ever gone through an integration, you've heard the word dependency. Sometimes to do something here, sorry, I'm off screen here, you have to do something over here first to get that done. I think that that is a crucial thing that needs to be minded. Your partner should guide you in that. Finally, functionality over features. We want to take the best set of features and make them highly functional. We don't want to create as many features as possible and have a lot of bugs and have a lot of issues. We got to understand where real value is. People will mention things to any business, whether it's an association or it's a for-profit or whatever's happening. It's what we do with that information and how we react to it that helps us decide if it's going to really have a high value. We've seen so many times that they just keep adding and adding. One of my most, I would say, fearful phrases in the association world is, we had it before. We had it before, we have it now. You have to interview the value of each thing. I can't tell you in all aspects of any type of association or business how many times I've seen 10 pet projects put into a single website based on a senior executive's whim that provide no additional value but are costly in integrations and time. And saying we had it before is like, it's crazy. It's like trying to go from an SUV to a sports car and saying, where's all the room? Where is all the room? And you're like, well, we're trying to focus on the KPIs and we're trying to launch. They're like, yeah, but I need to fill the trunk and I need to put that Sears snail thing on the top of my car. You know, if you imagine it that way, it looks pretty ridiculous. A sports car with the giant camper thing on top. It's actually a pretty good visual right now in my mind. But let's keep going. Next slide, sorry. So putting experts to work. So most associations, I'd say 99% outsource this kind of work. That's obviously being exaggerating. There's some huge organizations that bring their development teams internal. But truth is, you know, what you think is true and what you think is a myth don't often align. So I like to do a slide like this. So partner with internal staff and experienced professionals. Partnering with them is important to your integration. So what I mean by that is a lot of times an integration partner will come in and be like, we can handle both sides. We've got the WordPress, the Drupal, the Symfony, the Sitecore, the Ectron handle, plus we have insert marketing platform here, insert AMS here, insert whatever product, community platform here, LMS. And the truth is, that's probably not true. You probably have a specialized vendor for each of those systems to help you build out, install it. And especially when it comes to AMSs, each of those configurations is different. They're deployed custom for you, which means the APIs will interact in different ways. If you want to make changes inside of those systems, you need to have an expert on that side that drives for the association. Having someone like an Unleashed come in and look at that will help the best we can, but we didn't configure that system. We don't know the reasons that exist around why that logic was created. So while we can do it, we're not always the best group to do that. What we want to focus on is we take care of everything up to what I call the front door of that system. So let's call it the digital presence, the communication all the way down as we're interfacing with that system. But what data comes in and comes out and how it's structured is dependent on the person that put that system together. There are some systems that are more standard, and if there's no customizations, then we don't have a lot to talk about. I've never seen it. There's always some kind of configuration. People rarely use things directly out of the box. Their integrations are complicated by nature. During the process, a couple things will happen, no matter how it's sold to you or what happens. And this has been learned painfully by myself being in this industry over 13 years and seeing success and failure and learning from it and growing from it. Integrations are complicated. There will be hiccups and issues will come up. What we care about is how big or small they are and how we mitigate them and tackle them when they come. And I already mentioned, make sure you have experts on all sides of the effort. From a myths perspective, this is a really important one. And this actually hurts me because or hurts Unleashed to say this, but it's true, which is a web vendor doesn't need to be outrageously experienced in every single AMS to provide you a high level of value. And the reason I say that that hurts me is because in 13 years, we've worked with everything. And so the first thing we see in any RFP or when somebody reaches out directly is, have you done X? And my answer is always like, yeah, because I've been here way too long, you know? And so that's really great for me. But the truth is, if you're on a Salesforce derivative or you're on a really better known platform, people are going to be able to integrate with that. While there might be some learning lessons there, they're going to have the wherewithal. Too often people look for vendors that have, 25 installations of this, have done this 30 times, and they think that they're reducing the risk. That's not always reducing the risk. Just because somebody's done something a lot doesn't mean they're good at it. And then that is a very, very important thing to understand. Pre-built integrations are ready to go out of the box. Like Drupal to Salesforce, there's tons of pre-built integrations. Not so much for things like Quantitative or maybe Nimble because they're very customized and they run their own API versions, right? But there's certain things where you can get from an open source community where if you're more standard, you can get those integrations much quicker, sometimes even than what's being told or sold to you. The most important part to figure that out is a little bit of research and you can ask it from your vendor. Maybe you have a long-term relationship with someone and you want to see them expand, but they need to go out there and see what's available. The biggest myth is once an integration is done, you will not have future needs or issues. I promise you, you will need support for your integrations. If the AMS makes an update to their software, maybe you still have something local on a box or a server hosted somewhere that's not a SaaS platform and Windows doesn't update. It could break the API. Or it could break the API or it could break the connection to the API. Maybe you do something inside the website that you have your vendor do, your partner, and it has an impact on the API. Associations have to build in a budget to understand that these things come up, and because they come up, they're just not exclusively the fault of whoever's system's changed. This is a natural byproduct of doing business. You change the oil in your car, you get flat tires. You can't call the manufacturer back and say this, and that. What you need to understand there in that particular example is that once you have things where you want them to be and you're constantly iterating and adding, you're tinkering with an engine. And if you tinker too much or you make the band of performance too narrow, if you jump outside of that, things are going to happen. Now, the good news about that is it shouldn't be terribly detrimental. It just needs something you need to plan for in your annuities, right? It's like, okay, this is what I have in my annuities to make sure that if anything comes up with these integrations, that I'm able to tackle it and that money's planned for. Let's go next slide. So iterative testing. So I'm going to tell you what you should look for now. Now this is getting into a little bit of buyer beware with also you should be doing this. So we're giving a little mixture of both. So buyer beware. If you work with a group that doesn't have published milestones, pre-planned demos, trackable tasks, and launch plans, plus training, that is bad. That means that the maturity is not there for the integration and that you're probably going to suffer during the process. And you may decide that that's an acceptable risk to suffer based on a myriad of factors, cost being one of them. But having proper project management and solutions architecting is vital to the success of an in-depth integration. Having those milestones, understanding how the tasks fall under them will create a Gantt chart for you, and those pre-planned demos will oftentimes actually be hard to watch because they'll be in unpolished systems. But what you're looking for is the functionality, not the beauty. And they'll show you iteratively as they go where they're at and why they think they're on time or they're trending behind or ahead of schedule. Training, particularly, we like to bring people in on training as soon as we can when it's in workable positions for specific things that people would use it for. Because when we launch, one of the biggest things you'll see amongst association groups is they'll talk about how certain things are broken or not broken. And this is a hard message to hear, but it's also at the same time, it's like sometimes things aren't broken, they just don't know how to use them. Now, they may not be useful in the way that an association will want. We can rectify that and change the experience. But a lot of times, training is not taken into account in the integration process on how to leverage that on both sides. There shouldn't be a lot there depending, well, sometimes there's a lot there and sometimes there's not. It depends on what kind of integration it is. From association expectations, you've got to have an engaged and dedicated primary contact. This is very important. A lot of people talk about it, but what will happen is they'll put someone and say, you're a dedicated and engaged primary contact, but they're wearing 15 hats. And they have to make the decision on a day-to-day basis what hat they're going to wear. And that's fair. I mean, that's the role of the job, but this has to be one of the high priority hats. And senior leadership, you should get buy-in on that right from the beginning, say, I'm putting this first and foremost, because that's what can really hurt you on the long term. You need to gain support from an internal advocacy perspective and scope control. Now, scope control is this term is taken out of context because scope is the thing that people always talk about, particularly in associations. What scope control should be for is about making sure that small amounts of features work really, really well and way beyond expectation. So what we want to do is we can do anything and we can grow it at any time, but what we want to do is say, we're focused on this and this is going to work great. Now that we're done with this, what is it that you wanted to add on to this? If you want to tell them about it, and then we put it in what we call a backlog, a list of things where we can expand upon that, we think that's a wonderful idea. And you should think it's a wonderful idea as well, but we must make sure that we do right by the base installations. You do want to hear about them because they could affect how certain things are built, but you want to make sure that you add them onto the stack when it makes sense. Clarity and approval processes. So this one's obvious, I'm not going to harp on it. If the person that's in charge of us doesn't have full authority to make a decision on if an integration is approved or not, just make sure you have the right committee and that whoever you work with from an iterative testing perspective, they understand what that process is as well. One of the things that we would say is in approval, you should be helping with the testing. You might look at that as just a partner responsibility. But the truth is the partner is going to QA it. He's going to throw it back. They're going to go through the QA division of the company. They're going to throw it back to the developers and the designers. They're going to tweak it again. They're going to throw it back again. As long as that was successful and there's not more to do, then it's going to come to the association. When it comes to the association, the expectation, we're always striving to give you something error-free. But that is usually not what happens. What happens is you're going to find small things and you're part of that testing process because you will use the software and interact with it maybe in ways that we didn't think about. Perhaps we're doing a different type of connection to a database that has records that we didn't know about that need to be fixed, and that's okay. We don't want to be angry about that. We want to work together about that, on that, and make it better. Let's go next slide. So teamwork is very valuable and important to me. I've done this personally, the exact image that you see here, and it has worked as planned. But training needs to be held iteratively on functioning portions. Partners association be part of the quality. I basically jumped the shark on this slide completely. So, but always be part of the solution. And that was the last part I said, is like, negativity doesn't drive success and it doesn't drive innovation. And that includes everybody, whether it's the partner, the association, maybe the third party that's representing the other system. Like, we have to have high energy and we have to have a really positive direction for these things so that we can, like, we're doing the right things. So that is very, very important. Let's go next. I don't want to beat that up since we've already done it. So management, yeah, let's go next. Post-launch. We talked about this earlier, but some type of growth package, some hourly reserve, and this can encompass more than the integrations that you have. It can encompass future growth, general support, patches and upgrades. You'll see that these days this is very common to be outsourced, and it's very important to be outsourced because we see people that just do what they need to do to support, and then they add things on from what we call a time and materials perspective as they see fit. But we see a lot of people doing what we call growth, which is they have set aside amount of hours every month so they can continue to iteratively build on their integrations, their web platforms, and work on the conversion rate optimization while taking care of all the base stuff that they have to month to month. Post-launch, it's never one and done in software, and it's just terrible news, right? You wish it could be, but it's not. So let's go next. Things to remember, my favorite slide. So we want to create that pay no mind experience, which is, just by title is completely counterintuitive, but it's true. If people come through your website, sign up, have immediate access to resources, can change their account settings, auto renew, immediately go across different systems, be able to get back, those things, while they're not rewarding it for you with a high five, it's one of the reasons why they think you're valuable, whether you realize it or not. It's one of those things that just operates in the background. I always relate it to hosting. You never call your hosting provider. But if somebody asked you, do you like your hosting provider? And you say, I love them. What you really said was, I never hear from them or talk to them because my stuff's always on, up, and it's operating quickly. That's a great relationship, right? But the metric's different. And it's similar here with functionality over features and the pay no mind experience, is that no news is good news when you're talking about how seamless your experience is. When you really hit something exceptional, people will reach out and say, this is fantastic, but that's 1 out of 10 people. It's like driving community, right? What do they say? 90% are watchers and 10% are actually engaged in the community. Know the value and cost of your efforts. And this is my favorite. It's not what you had, it's what is valuable. It's not all if you're creating a new website, you're trying to leave the baggage behind. We don't need the overhead carrier. Leave it back and let's make that sports car together. Okay. I think that's my last slide. It is. Look at me. I'm without the beard, but I'm the same guy. Are there any questions that came through? I'm hoping at least one, maybe.
Yeah, I have, there's a couple quick questions. One I will take because it's very important. Maybe the most important question we ever had. What is the Ocho? The Ocho is a fake sports network that was in the movie Dodgeball. Yes. That shows obscure sports like paintball that Mike likes. Very critical that you know that. So also, you kind of touched on this before, but they did want to get a little bit deeper into describe the relationship a little bit between the AMS tech teams and support teams and your web development team, whether it's internal or external.
Sure. So typically a web development team for associations will have a lot of experiences integrating with AMSs, but their job, the buck kind of stops at the data that they're pushing and pulling back and forth from the AMS. So depending on how your AMS is configured and the type of fields that you create, it changes what's available in the AMS. So your AMS team would be, and let me give a random example. Let's say you have IMUS. Typically if you have IMUS, you had a professional service provider that installed IMUS and did all the work for IMUS. That person would be the person that the web team would want to talk to say, is there any customizations here? We're trying to connect and pull these different things out. Or they want to do this. Does this exist in the AMS today? And if so, how does it work? Or if not, can you create it? So the group that works inside the actual AMS and is responsible for building the API that we connect with from a web perspective, that's the group that's on the AMS side. The web side is we're able to take it as long as we can get to the data and we can push and pull back and forth in the ways that we need to, we can run it from there.
All right, excellent. All right, and that does it for our questions. And impressively, we were right on time. A magical moment. So, okay,
Yes.
everyone, thank you for attending today's webinar. We really appreciate it. As mentioned before, we will be sending out a recording of the webinar to all registrants. And as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us and let us know. So, all right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.